Hi everyone, my name's Kryojen. Behind me, that's Max and Lucy, my assistants. Today, I'm going to walk you guys through the drop from my VIP edit of the track I did with Kermode called For You. Let's jump right into it, shall we? Okay. First, I want to quickly walk you guys through how the project is structured out, and how I like to organize my stuff. I'm a big fan of carefully organizing your projects. It helps kind of keep things moving, and when you come back to have to edit things and change stuff, it helps keep your head straight. So the way this project is organized, I've got drums. Inside this drums group, of course, there's percussion and then kicks, and I keep those separate in case I have to bus process them as like a whole thing. Then I will have all of my elements from a particular section of the song in one group. So in this case, we just have this drop group here. And then last of all, I have this stems group, which of course contains all the original stems from the track. But let's start this walkthrough by having a look inside the drums group here. So inside, of course, there's percussion and kicks. And inside the percussion group, it's relatively simple, the percussion on this drop. I've got here clap, shaker loop, a couple of hats, and two fills, and then this crash that transitions us out of the drop into the next section. All right, to start this out, let's have a look at our claps. This clap here is made up of a few different layers. And I started here with a pre-shifted clap. And I really like pre-shifted claps because they feel like they're kind of pulling you into the downbeat. It's basically just a little bit of a pre-sweep up into the clap. So like, there we go. It kind of pulls you into that downbeat, which for this style of music, I really like. It kind of, if you think about like your headbanging, it's a bit fast for headbanging, but if you're headbanging, you know, it's the part where you're throwing your head in. Yeah. So, and then on top of that, we got this clap here, this second layer. This is my kind of really snappy, really harsh layer. It adds some top end bite, and it really emphasizes the transient, because the thing about a pre-shifted clap is it does kind of take away from the snappy transient part of your sound. However, of course, using this, we are re-adding that, basically. Then down here, third clap is, this one's a little more bassy, and it is there to add some lower end punch, sort of complement the kick, and yeah, just make the clap feel that much more powerful. On every second clap, I added an additional pre-shifted clap that has a much longer sweep, as you can see here. And this clap, basically it takes your sound, it makes it a more interesting clap loop. So instead of having the exact same sound every single time, adding this clap, this extra layer here, keeps the clap interesting for longer, because now you're hearing this as being your familiar element as opposed to just this. And it lasts much longer before you're kind of familiar with the pattern. And on top of that, it just kind of feels better. Altogether, these claps are basically EQ'd. I do some transient processing here to make them feel a lot snappier than they already do. Of course, we're pulling down some of the body of the sound and pushing up the transient, the more snappy part of the sound, and then turning up the gain a little bit. Some saturation to kind of this preset here, or this saturation model here, I find makes the sound feel just a little bit more warm and full. I'm driving it not too hard, because the sound coming into this isn't that loud to begin with. We can see if I solo it, it's not crazy. It's not a crazy hot signal. But it's basically just warming up the sound. Over here, glue compressor is, again, it's just kind of gelling everything together. And then I'm clipping it, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on. And last but not least, re-emphasizing the transients. It's pretty much a carbon copy of this initial preset here. And that just re-emphasizes our transients and makes sure that gets us our kind of final clap sound. Now from here on out, it's pretty much, I have a shaker loop here. That's kind of groovy, just helps emphasize the groove of the track. There's a couple of hats here to just kind of augment the shaker loop. And then we have our two fills. So this fill is pretty much just, I like to take acoustic sounds and layer them into my projects as much as possible. Breathes kind of an interesting life into a track, I find. Start with this guy, which is very much like a classic rock and roll kind of fill. And layer it up with this straight up electronic one. Grab them together, a little bit of glue compression to gel them, and get this fill. The end drop fill is kind of similar. I've taken a couple of different fill loops, but instead of having them just sit on top of each other, I have one kind of flow into the next one, and this one is heavily distorted because it sounds really cool. And it flows into this guy here, which is just sort of our, yet another electronic-y kind of fill. Two crashes. These ones are, as you can see, pan to the left and right. So you kind of get this call and response from the one side to the next. And last but not least, this crash is not actually being processed as part of this group, but it is more or less part of this fill. And it's kind of this crash here hits when the next section starts and kind of helps to just flow everything into the verse. That's it for percussion, really. It's pretty simple. My kick here, let's have a look. Kick here is one that I made a while ago now. And I like it, it's boomy. But what I've done here, I've actually done quite a bit of processing, as you'll see. So it's being compressed with just an 1176 to kind of control the low end. You can hear the difference. Kind of tightens up that low end. It's being clipped here. You can see the range is all the way down to 0. So this compressor is not actually, the compression circuit isn't actually engaged, just the clipping circuit. And then over here, I'm beefing up the low end. Counterintuitively, beefing up the low end based on that tighter low end, running it through yet another 1176 to control what's coming out of our bass, and then clipping again with glue compressor, and then a little bit of multiband compression just to take care of that low boominess, just that much more. We end up with our final kick sound here, which is, it's got boom, but it's not like out of control. It's got punch. It's got some power. Sounds really good on a big system. And then for the second half of the drop, just to switch things up a little bit and keep things interesting, I added a little hi-hat sound. So all together, it gives us a little kind of a little sizzle on the top end. All right, let's dig into the juicy stuff. This here is the drop bus, and the drop bus has, so this drop stuff bus is basically all the main lead elements, except for this little fill lead. And the reason for that is this fill lead doesn't work when it's processed the same way. These things are all being group processed here, which we'll go over this chain in a second. But this fill lead didn't really work with that chain, but everything else does. And there's a bass. This is providing the low end, the sub, and then all these impact sounds, which are kind of at the beginning of each sort of phrase. These provide that, these are that kind of impacty sound, which is why they're called impacts. And then of course there's this exhaust, which is what it sounds like. It's essentially just a white noise kind of downsweep thing. All right, let's have a look in the drop stuff bus. So the main lead you hear that runs the melody line is made up of three elements essentially. There's this patch here, and this patch here. The first sound, which is this guy, is just a serum patch really that is being EQ'd and compressed. All of these presets will be available in the link in the description if you want to download them, so check that out. I'm not actually going to go through them too much in this tutorial because this is more of a general walkthrough. But if you want to open them up and dig into them yourself, click the link in the description. So the drop lead here, it's basically just a serum patch that's being EQ'd kind of aggressively and then clipped. You can see again, range knobs down to 0. In this case, it did not have to apply any makeup gain. The patch is pretty hot, and that's it. The next patch is one I made on my Prophet, and it is on the plucky side. And it adds a little bit of pluck, it adds a little bit of low-end warmth or lower-end warmth, and a bit of extra character to the overall sound. And then lastly, we have this lead here. And this layer is just kind of reinforcing the other two a little bit. Altogether, they sound and that's how you have your lead. That's your lead sound right there. Next, there's some chords, because chords are good. Chords are kind of cool. This is, again, another serum patch with some processing. These are designed to kind of sound like a very thinned out version of your typical future bass chords. So they're being distorted, a little bit of reverb to kind of soften the sound. This is a very short reverb, basically no tail at all, very small size, and it basically just softens up the chords a bit. Some Saturn to boost your presence, just a bit. Then EQ, so analog style EQ from one of my favorite channel strips. And last but not least, it's being clipped quite aggressively. Altogether, these are being processed. They're being processed with some analog EQ, analog style EQ, some relatively aggressive digital EQ. This is also dynamic, as you can see, so it's kind of reacting to the incoming signal. A little bit more analog style EQ, this time from a different analog EQ. And the reason I like to use these different EQs is the different interfaces, the different way they sort of present their options to you kind of leads to, changes the way you're thinking about the sound. And especially with this kind of EQ, I find that it forces me to use my ears a lot more than something like Pro Q3, because you're quite limited with your options. You end up with a bit of a more, in my opinion, a bit of a more musical result. Saturn, kind of the same thing. It's just multi-band distortion. We're kind of warming up the bands differently. This glue compressor here is actually being used for compression. There's a little bit of glue kind of gelling everything together. And then, of course, I'm sidechaining this whole bus to this impacts bus. So because there is actually sound here, I wanted a bit of lead sound, a bit of that kind of pulse you get from these leads, but I didn't want it to, I needed it to sort of get out of the way of these impacts because these things hit a little harder. And the sidechain just kind of helps everything fit together. So let's have a look at this fill lead here. This guy is basically, it's just a simple silent patch. Again, this will be available for download in the whole, there's going to be a big pack. If you want to go in the description again, click the link, download them all. This patch is being saturated a bit, a little bit of tape saturation as well, and then a bit of compression and of course clipping because everything has to be clipped. And it's basically just emphasizing this little that happens at the fills, during the fills. Next is the bass. And this bass sound is kind of interesting. It is. So you can hear it's the bass. It's providing the sub frequency content. It is not a nice clean sign, and that's because I find this especially this particular patch, it just sounds really cool. It adds some depth to your bass that's not usually there. It moves a little bit. It's not like consistently powerful the way it's not perfectly consistently powerful the way a sine bass is, like a sine wave sub is, but it adds a bit of movement and a bit of character to your low end that I find isn't as common in music these days, especially where a lot of artists are focused on they just want the sub to be working as hard as possible. I find I do sacrifice a bit of, in my music, I do sacrifice a little bit of low end power, raw low end power for some movement and some character. And it doesn't always work, but when it does, it works really well. And I feel like it works really well here. So again, pretty much the same process as most of the other sounds. It's just being EQ'd a little bit and then being clipped. You can see on this one, range is at 0, so it's not actually compressing, it's just clipping. And now for our impacts bus. So these are the big hits you hear right at the beginning. They're kind of the part of the call and response. That is the first bar, or every other bar. And it's comprised of a few elements. One is a horn that is being distorted and transient processed. And this just comes from the Contact Factory library. One of those ones that's just hiding, if you dig down into your orchestral and your brass section, it's right here. Super nice preset, or sample pack rather. And basically the only thing I'm actually doing to it, I've just set it to staccato mode, and I'm turning off the reverb, the built-in reverb, because it's running through my own reverb bus. Yeah, super underrated Contact Factory library, well worth digging into and having a look through. Next is this super saw hit. And this nice big fat chord, very simple preset, basically just all the voices maxed out on saw waves. One oscillator pitched up, one down, and then just some detuning. Super, super simple. There's not even any fancy like noise or anything happening there. And it just kind of adds, again, some extra width and some extra meat to these impacts. There is this guy here, and this kind of functions. It's a little bit of a melody line, as you can see. It's got a little bit of a melody that it's doing, and this is a patch that's designed to sound kind of it's kind of Skrillexy almost. It adds the real bite and that kind of hollow FME sound to our impacts. All of these, same as before, pretty much the same kind of bus processing happening. Some multi-band saturation, a little bit of presence boost, some analog style EQ to just kind of shape things out nicely, and then a bit of compression and clipping, because again, clipping is essentially the secret sauce to making things really loud without crushing them. Altogether, this part of the bus of the hit impacts sounds like this. There is one other element. So this impact here, it actually should be above these, but whatever. This is kind of the first hit of each song. You see it comes before any of the lead elements. It comes before these impacts. And it sounds like this. It's your nice, really transient, heavy, FME, gnarly sound that introduces you to the drop. Again, very similar chain to everything else, just getting rid of some of the low end, some distortion, some analog style EQ, and then some clipping to make it nice and loud. Again, another patch that I'll have in the pack for you guys if you want to download those. Altogether, this impact section sounds like this. The very last element we're going to look at today is this exhaust, and it's quite simple. It's literally just a little white noise. Kind of phasey because it's being stretched. It's being time stretched quite a bit, but that's okay. It sounds cool. And the reason there's this gap here is so it this builds us up and kind of indicates to the listener that, hey, something's happening. We're changing. Something's going to change here. That gap there, when it works, it really works. It's nice. It is sort of makes you look up and think, because if this were just extended out like this, and you had a mostly smooth transition, it doesn't feel this loses some impact. This little gap here basically gives this that much more impact. And that is all of the elements in this drop. It's not a super complicated drop. There's a bit of sound design happening. The chords, having these chords here, I find is super important. It adds, even though you're not really hearing them in the way you would hear like a chord progression in like a guitar or song or something, they definitely contribute to the harmonic interest of the track. Same thing with the horns and the supersaws down here. It's basically just this main lead sound that's a couple of layers and, a bass, and then these impacts, these like punchy phrase starters, I guess you could call them. Very simple. I am a huge fan of not overproducing if I can help it. My tracks don't tend to have huge numbers of tracks. I like to keep things kind of simpler. Thank you very much for joining me on this walkthrough. Thank you very much to Kermode for hosting me on his channel for this video. You can check me out. All of my links and stuff are in the description. And once again, I will have a pack of all the presets I used in this drop here for you to download if you want. There'll be some serum and some silent presets. They'll be marked, so if you want to check those out, dig through them, explore them, see some of the more sound designing stuff that I've done on this track, feel free to. Once again, my name's Kryojen. Thank you very much for joining me. Have a good one, and I'll catch you on the flip side.